Welcome everyone, 440 Gallery Artist Talk. Today we're featuring The Journey Home, Jo-Ann Acey solo show, along with our project space artists Ellen Chuse, Hyunju Kim, and Catherine Orrok, and their show is called Abstraction By Many Means. And the shows are going to be up through April 20th, so spread the word. And without further ado, let's get started. Jo-Ann, congratulations on a beautiful show. This show is bright, it's lyrical, it's engaging, it's like a soothing balm that we all need on our collective journey right now. Can you begin by speaking about the title, The Journey Home?
Yes, I've used that title 3 times. This is the 3rd time I've used that title. Back in, I think, the 90s, the early 90s, I had a solo show and it was called The Journey Home. And it was pretty much an abstract painting show, but it had images that reflected rooftops. And the place where I grew up, everybody had a gabled roof. And, oh, hi, Kim. And so there were passages of those kinds of images, and also childhood memories. My grandmother lived on Elm Street in Utica, New York, and I used to pick the neighbors' tulips. And then they would call my grandmother and tell her that I was picking the tulips, and my grandmother would say, my granddaughter did not pick those tulips, but the tulips were right there in a jar on the table. And I was about 6 years old, and I just thought my grandmother was just the best. So there was one of those paintings was a memory of that. It was called Tulips for Grandma on Elm Street. And then the following year, I had another show, and I called it The Journey Home, a Self-Portrait. And that was also an abstract show, and it was in pastels. So all these years later, going from the 90s to now, I realized that, people say, oh, your work has changed so much, or I knew that was your work, but I think that we go on a journey, and home can mean a lot of different things, but I think that so far, it's like 7 decades is a long journey. So I feel like the show is about that journey and about change. It's also about memories. And home doesn't have to be a place where you live. It could be something that's inside of you, something that makes you feel at peace or sad or joyful. And so I think that's the journey I'm talking about. I grew up in central New York, so I was very much inspired by the landscape of the Mohawk Valley. The 3 small pieces here are called the Mohawk landscape. I think I always have been I've been fortunate to live in a place that has seasons, the change of the seasons. And I lived in Arizona for about a year, and one of the things I missed most was the change of the seasons. Although if you went far enough up to Mount Lemon, there was snow. You'd be putting your clothes on as you went higher and higher up. And then you come back down the mountain and you go in the swimming pool. So, but I remember it being Christmas time, and I feel like very, very disoriented that, I could be wearing shorts instead of seeing snow. So I think my childhood and growing up in that area has really been an inspiration. So I think that's the basis of the show.
Thank you. I can appreciate that. I think that that's what people are responding to, that sort of heart journey, that feeling like that there's something familiar here, something comforting, something soothing. And thank you for giving us that whole background. So Jo-Ann, one thing that strikes me about your work is how consistently fresh and clear your use of color is. What's your secret?
It is a secret. And I don't even know the answer to You're a real deep seeker. I don't think that when I'm approaching my work, I don't really think about theory. I think I just go for it. And I think it's a natural ability because I really don't think about theory. And when I was younger, I studied with abstract expressionists who never taught me color theory. I didn't really start thinking about color theory until I was teaching, and then I had to like teach. I had to teach myself about color theory. But I think it's somebody described it once as kind of a gift that I had. I was applying for a scholarship in graduate school, and they were asking me a lot about color theory, and I really didn't know the answers. And the person who became the chair of my MFA program, she said to me, don't worry about it. You have a natural ability. And I don't know why or where it came from, but some people can sing, and some people can make color, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I think you're making color sing.
Yeah.
So in this work and in much of your work that we've seen in the past, there's a sense of landscape as well as movement. I sometimes imagine you moving through many different landscapes. So my question is, what is your studio practice like? Do you ever work on plein air? Do you need to balance your time in the studio with travel or being outdoors? How does that work?
Well, I think that, first of all, I'm not a plein air painter. I work directly. I don't use photographs. I don't really sketch out the composition. Once in a while, I might just draw some lines just to give me a sense of where I'm going to go. But usually, I just start applying the paint, and then I let that kind of dictate where I'm going to go next. I think. Could you just give me some more of a question? I lost it there.
Well, like, what's your? Do you come into the studio and like have place in mind? Do you need to like feed yourself by traveling or going to the park, or I don't know? It's just like this consistent sense of landscape.
I think going back to my childhood is if you grew up in a place where there was beautiful landscape. I mean, the Mohawk Valley is quite beautiful, and having the seasons and the color that changes and the atmosphere. Like I love fall. I just think that everything is so much clearer and fresh in the fall. So I sort of think about that. The other thing that I think about though is, yes, I have traveled, and I remember like many years ago going to Ireland for the first time and just thinking like, oh my God, I've never seen anything so beautiful in my whole life, And then, I've traveled to Europe, and every time you see a new place and a new landscape or a seascape, you just, you feel like it's the first time you're experiencing something. But I think the first time I realized, I think it was after I came back from Ireland, and I was on a train from Utica to New York, an Amtrak train, and along the Hudson River and the Palisades, and you just, all of a sudden I looked and I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't have to go to Ireland to experience it. It's right here in my own backyard. But even as a child, I sometimes tell the story about being in a car with my parents and going west from Utica, and I think it was the first time I really ever experienced a sunset, and I just happened to be looking out the car window, and I was just like, I got so excited, and I was like, oh, Daddy, look at the sky, look at the sky. And I must have been about 9 years old, but I think I never had really seen the horizon and the sun setting like it was, and the sky just filled with the most beautiful colors. So I think I react to that all the time, though. So I don't know. It's just something that I've learned to look more. My dad used to say that I noticed things that other people didn't notice, and I think that might be true. The other thing about the work is, kind of goes with traveling, but when you're in a plane, I always want the window looking out the window at all times, and there's times where it's night and you can see the sky and the clouds, and you know, and it's just so beautiful. And then there's times when you're flying into a city or a location, and you look down and you see all of the, like in Ireland, you see all of the land and the separations and the rectangles and the squares and all the different colored greens. So I've sort of like trained myself to always be looking for those kinds of things.
So it sounds like you're like feeding your imagination. When you're in your studio, it's your imagination that you're always taking it in whenever you're experiencing things. So we've already asked you to reveal secrets, but inquiring minds want to know, what do you see coming next? Do you have new inspiration? Is there new media? Are there new venues that you're
Well, I don't really ever plan ahead of time what I'm going to do, but I think that the work evolves, like from one show or one series, I should say, to the next. I think a lot of these have to do more with the landscape and change and cycles, and but I'm doing a lot of new work, but I think it's mostly based on the sea. That's another thing. I didn't see the ocean until I was 16 years old, and I was just like amazed. And then I had a college friend who had a house at the shore in New Jersey, and you know, we used to be kind of like party girls, so I didn't really pay attention too much to the sea. But then several years ago, I started seeing dolphins, and they call me the dolphin whisperer now because I know exactly when those pods are coming up and down. So I think that, you know, I'm sort of intrigued with that whole idea, you know, the horizon and the sea and what's sky and what's water. So I'm working on some series like that, and I have a show coming up in Martha's Vineyard, which is kind of what I'm kind of thinking about now.
And that's a first for you, a show on Martha's Vineyard?
Yeah.
Because I know you spend a lot of time there.
Yeah. Well,
congratulations.
I don't spend as much time as I'd like, but yeah, it'll be good. It'll be good.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jo-Ann.
Thank you.
So we're going to move on to project space. We're going to start with Ellen Chuse. Ellen, congratulations on a wonderful show in the project space. These pieces feel both familiar yet new and different. How did you make your selections?
Thank you, Karen. How did I make my selections? Well, I was struggling a lot last year, finding some forms that were working for me, some, you know, but still searching. And so, among other things, I kind of wanted to break out of a color palette that I've been using a lot. So, in the fall, I went back to working with some circular orb-like shapes and doing a bunch of small pieces that were just kind of fun. And then the 4 blue, which just tried to take it to another color place.
That's the one with the green background.
The one with the green and the blue, yeah. And then very original title, 4 blue. I mean, you know, there are some things, because that actually speaks to something that, but the other piece, the Watchers, that emerged. That was the first piece.
That's the larger piece.
That's the large orange piece with the very ominous black forms. We'll leave it at that. That piece, I started out thinking I was making a very different piece, and that's the piece that emerged. And I always, Donald Trump brings out just, you know, after his first election, no, I'm quite serious, I got into these very, very dark forms that were very ominous and gradually became more and more meditative. And that has sort of carried me through. And this, I was trying for something, and it just, this is what emerged. And so sometimes you just have to accept that. But I think it's kind of an interesting contrast, because this recent painting with the dark circular forms has an ominous quality to it, and yet you have those same circular forms in the smaller work, and they feel very light,
Fun.
kind of fluffy,
Yeah.
all of that.
Playful.
And that is actually one of the things that I'm always grappling with, because those forms are, they're it's an archetypal form. The form is everywhere. It's everywhere in nature, it's everywhere in art, it's everywhere in life, and it's archetypal forms feel familiar, even if you don't know what they are. They just feel familiar. They are something that humans have responded to throughout time. But I find with the color, it changes it. You know, I often try, like the one with the 4 blue forms, and yes, you know, it's the blue, but it's not often what I'm looking for, if that makes sense. And so I go back to the dark forms, which by the way are not black. They're made with layers of Jenkins green and cerulean blue layered, and sometimes the green is predominant, sometimes the blue. If you get up close, you can see it. If you're far away, it just reads as black, but they're not black. And so I thought this was kind of a good contrast to see, you know, that's why
To see them hanging together.
to see them hanging together. And it's kind of something I'm always grappling with. But I always go back to the darker forms because they have more emotional meaning for me, and I hope for the viewer.
Mm-hmm. Well, that leads me to my next question. So when I see this work alongside Catherine and Hyunju's work, I think of the similarities but also the distinctions, and I wonder what your take on the title is, Abstraction by Many Means.
One of the challenges whenever we have a show in the project space, we don't plan it in terms of, you know, who would work well together or whatever. Sometimes we just have to figure it out logistically. Okay, who needs a show? And so we end up sometimes with work that really fits very easily, and sometimes with work that seems disparate, if that makes sense. But abstraction is something that is in all artwork, all of it. I mean, the composition of the most realistic, most you know, specific kind of painting will, the artist has created a composition, yes, a placement using abstraction.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in everything, and certainly, I mean, Catherine and I mean, we can, you know, float together in different ways because we both use color and we both use abstract forms that are very evocative, but, you know, something is happening here, but you don't know what it is, you know, that Bob Dylan song. Hyunju's work is also very abstract, even though it's also representational. So that's what the title means to me, is that there are many, many ways to abstraction and many definitions of abstraction.
Thank you. And you talked about this a little bit, but your work is really a celebration of saturated color. And I get really involved with the depth of color and the relationships you create, and I wonder if you can speak to your use of color, and I'd also be interested in, you know, like how it changes when it's like next to Hyunju's or next to Catherine's or next to, or by itself or next to one of your own.
Yeah, it's, you know, there's a little history here, and I won't go into too much of it. I was a sculptor before I was a painter, and actually I realized recently that I am basically a sculptor who paints, and suddenly it's like, I'm like, oh, of course, look at them. I mean, they're just forms, you know. They happen to be two-dimensional, but they're, you know, I'm not a Jo-Ann painter, although I have her extraordinary love of color, and like her, know nothing about color theory, even though we all had a class in it way back when. But I mean, her ability to use color is just extraordinary in a very different kind of way. You know, mine is sort of, I think, I always feel like it's much more basic. But at the same time, because I worked in fired clay, and I never painted. I mean, to me, color on sculpture was so confusing. I had no way of knowing how to do that. So then with many decades of black and white and gray work, and suddenly I moved into color, and it was like, well, if it's gonna be color, let's just let it be color, you know? I mean, I wanted to just sort of fall into it. And I want people to I want them to almost feel like they want to eat the color, if that makes sense. Like I want it to be that luscious or that enticing, if that makes sense. It is hard though. I gravitate a lot to red, orange, yellows, and with blues, very primary. And I'm trying really to kind of move in a slightly different direction right now. We'll see. You'll come see the show. You'll see what you think. But the layering, it just began. I work very intuitively. I know where I begin, but I have no idea where I'm going to end. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't even know what color it's going to be. I might have an idea in my head, as I did with the Watchers. And on the way to that idea, I was like, oh no, this is finished. There's nothing more that I can do to this that's going to make it. But the layering came because I felt I wasn't sophisticated in the use of colors, so I would put a color down, and I would go, oh no, that's not good. So then I would put another color, and bit by bit discovered that the layering just created a depth to it, a yumminess to it. So in that sense, I intend to layer when I begin. I always joke and say that I did realize soon that you don't start with cadmium red, which is a very expensive color. It's going to be your base color. Maybe burnt umber, ultramarine blue, something. Yes, exactly. It's just like, slow down here. But that the color builds and changes. Did that answer the question?
Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Good.
And we'll repeat it again, but Ellen has the next show coming up with the following show starting in May.
It opens May 29th, and we will have an opening reception on May 31st. That is not Memorial Day weekend. Memorial Day weekend is the weekend before. So, just so you know.
Some more Ellen Chuse to look forward to.
Yeah, and some sculpture that came out of the vault from the 1970s.
Thank you, Ellen. And Ju, congratulations.
Thank you.
I am so excited. This is your first time showing in the project space.
Yeah.
And your work is spectacular here. And the project space magic has not failed us. How did you make your choices for the show?
Before I explained, English is my second language, so I'm gonna write
Take your time and
yeah.
no worries.
Sure. So what these two works have in common is that they are both new works made using only thread and sewing. So after COVID, I started making a new artwork. It was different way, not using product with which is already made, like a coating or some fabrics. So I made a foundation with thread and sewing only, and one of right side images the portrait of the Rembrandt when he was young, and the other side is one of my students.
Portrait of your student.
Yeah.
When she was young.
Yeah. No, she's young.
She was here yesterday.
Yeah.
Oh,
Her
wow.
family was here.
Exciting. Did you want to say anything else?
No.
Okay. I didn't want to think. So, process is very important for all the work in this show, and I'm particularly intrigued by yours. So I know you said that they're made by sewing. but how are they made by sewing? Can you explain it a little more?
Yeah, sure. So I use the sewing machine.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to try make a paint or the drawings of like pictures.
Mm-hmm.
So it's my technique. So I studied the painting.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to explain, but first time I just made a layer of thread and then sew.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
By hand.
Yeah, by hand.
And then
And
then
no,
you-
by hand is a machine.
Oh, with the machine.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Like a layer
And-
of thread.
and so it's not
It's like it's the same way that when you do the paint. But
so you kind of just
so when you mix the paint with water, the water is glue, right?
mm-hmm.
It's a sewing machine is like glue, brush something.
It's because it's connecting the thread.
Yes.
When you have the tension really loose. See now the tension is for example,
Uh-huh.
when I used to sew, right, long ago, on a really old machine that my mother had, I would be sewing away and then it would like go, and I'd take it out and I'd look on the back and it would be all, and it was because the tension wasn't right.
But I never had experience like that. So when you,
Why I did not sew today.
when you see your clothing, you can see the in front and the back side.
Mhm.
So when the sewing machine has the function is to make a connection with
Right, it's,
yeah.
it's looping, looping, looping,
Yeah.
yeah. And so you're just letting it loop,
Yes.
loop, loop,
Yes.
and,
And then
and somehow.
I just like do the sketch with the threads.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
it is
And
amazing.
so how long would it take to complete
It
this
is-
size? This is pretty big for such
Yeah,
a thing,
it's
right?
almost 1 month to 2 months.
Yeah, okay,
Mhm.
that makes sense,
Yeah.
because, that must be a lot of looping.
A lot of thread too.
Well,
So
thank
I
you.
have to do like this, focus. So I have to take off and then put the wall on the wall and then
Mhm.
see and then again.
Yeah, that makes sense, because it really looks different from back here than up close, as everybody must have noticed. And, you know, that's part of the abstraction, is
Right.
that, you know, it's very beautiful just to look at a small piece of it,
Yeah.
but then it's kind of amazing to step back and see it make a
Yeah.
picture.
Sure.
Also, can if I ask a question, can you achieve the same effects by hand versus a sewing machine? Can
Would you be able to do it without the machine?
Sometimes I can do, but the sewing machine is very important to me. So I want to use everything. So I can use with by hand or the sewing machine, but I prefer to make a artwork that with the sewing machine.
So that kind of leads me to my next question. So, because you're new to the gallery and we all are new to your work, I'd like to know more about your history as an artist and maybe why you're connected to the sewing machine
Yes.
and what brought you to work in this way.
Can I read? The first time I started sewing was when I was in the third years of undergrad. As a student at the time, I tried a lot of things. I tried mixing coding and painting together, but just one day I had time to look back my past. So while thinking of myself looking back, I remember that the paintings I like as a child was drawn only when my mother was working. So my mom was also working when I was drawing in my childhood. So the time was the same, I thought, and at the same time I was put the some dot on the paper. Those dots like felt like a time, so like 1 second, 2 seconds, something like that. And then I looked at like a stitch. So so I thought I should starting doing sewing machine.
Ah, okay, and so it's like a way of keeping time.
Yes, and also my mom and me, the two of us are very special. So while my mom was working, I do something and waited for her. So when mom came home, I just started to work.
So you were working and she was working?
Yes.
And then that, you stopped because she was home?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I remember one day I was on my way to go to school, and I remember passing my mother's at the sewing machine. She had a clothing factory, something like that.
She made clothing?
Yes.
Mhm.
So when I remember that, it came to me that people spend time the same time, but spend it for a different purpose. Yeah, my mother used a sewing machine for a living, but I use it for artistic purpose that have nothing to do with money.
Right.
So this is the most interesting part in me, and I haven't found any specific answer yet, but because I'm still really young. But as time goes by and I have many experience, I'm sure I'll be better to find it.
Thank you so much for that.
That's great.
And thank you for taking the time to think about the answers and to share with us. Thank you. And now we'll move on to Catherine. Catherine, congratulations to you on this lovely show. I'm curious if this is new work for you and how you made your selections for the show.
Yes, it is new work, all from 2025. It started with me cutting up old drawings or paints on paper that I put away, wasn't satisfied with, and pulled them out and started chopping them up. And so, to answer your specific question about how I chose my work, so those are the small pieces. Experimenting with them and trying to figure out how I'm going to incorporate what's happening there into larger work. So those pieces led to the larger piece that's on the wall. I'm still not sure where it's gonna go, but that's they're definitely related. One kind of led to the other. The cutting up has been something that I'm interested in as a process. You go back, you look at things, it's not so precious anymore. You can do what you want with it, not say, oh, I love this so much, I can't mess it up, but it's not done, then what do I do? So put it away, you come back, you cut it up, and then paint over it again. So that's where the layering comes from.
So some of it is left from the
Yeah,
earlier piece,
residual.
and some of it is.
There might even be some of them that have like old dates on them.
Oh,
they're
interesting.
kind of like
That's
in the layer. So yeah.
Thank you. I'm always impressed with how your interesting palettes and compositions seem so organic yet governed by some orderly logic. Can you speak about your process in that sort of balance of geometric and organic?
Yeah. So the grid has kind of always been the behind the scenes structure that I use. but I love paint and paint and using paint expressively so you can see the marks, you know, how the artist's hand as you lay it down. But you need something to hang that all on. So I think my work, you know, before was a little more structured, you know, the grid a little bit more apparent. So that's part of what I'm trying to do with the what I call the squishy grids.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good way to call
Yeah.
it. They feel like they're getting more playful.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the small ones. I call them, you know, squishy grid 1, squishy grid 2. So I can go on and on with my squishy grids. But then incorporating them into a larger space, little bit that is a little more structured, but then having them operate in there. That's kind of what I'm playing with. So it's paint, space, color.
So, where do you see this leading? Probably because I'm an artist that gets a thrill out of collage. I kind of imagine that when you say cutting up, I think, oh, you're going to make a collage.
Yeah, yeah.
So I just wonder if that cutting up is influencing how the composition is going, and is there always going to be new paint involved, or
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, cutting up I find very liberating, and but I've always loved collage. I've done collage before, like my whole series when I did during the pandemic. I also cut up old drawings and made what I called my pandemic postcards. It was a whole series, postcard size, cut up, put back together. So that's always intrigued me. I find it a really fun process. And so I see, you know, putting them back together and then painting over them is something I'm definitely going to be, you know, working with and using those tools, because it's I don't know, I just find that it just allows, it's the process allows you to explore so many other avenues, and the materials that you use really influence the ultimate outcome. So, you know, whether it's different kinds of paint or paint on paper,
right.
cut up, you know, rejiggered, paint on top again. So I like the idea of that kind of layering, painting one thing on top of the other.
Yeah, and I guess we'll find out
Yes,
where it
you
leads.
will.
You can't really know, right? Especially when you're being playful.
That's right. That's right. That's part of the wonderful part of the process is you know, and scary too, because you don't know exactly what's going to happen. But learning to recognize that thing when it's there in front of you.
Thank you, Catherine.
You're welcome.
I do have some announcements for other shows that are going to be here and there, but I want to open the floor to questions from the people here today.
It's one of the things that I found so interesting hearing all of you speak was what Ellen described so eloquently about layering. Like, I just love the way you talked about layering, and all of your work
I know, I
is
just
so
realized
about
that as you were
layering.
talking.
Yeah, and it's and even like when you were talking about time, even layering time, you know, is such a, you know, and like my idea once you said how long a piece takes you to make, and the fact that you know, that you started off with these marks that were measuring time, that's a whole way of layering. And you know, each one of you did that so well and in such different ways. You should have a group show somewhere at another point, you know.
It's called layering.
Called layering.
Yeah.
I think someone used that title recently,
Yeah,
though, so, yeah.
Well, you can, yeah, but it's just
We'll bring
interesting
it
to
back.
see that
Yeah.
wonderful connection between all of them.
I have a question for Ellen. I also really enjoyed how you talked about the dynamic figure shapes, and how when you're starting out your composition at what point do you start looking at the negative space, and or what dictates each other? And do you try to find an even layering field, or is it a surprise for you how you're going to play with these shapes? Or
Well, actually now, I mean, I do make drawings, and I kind of scale the drawings, because now that I'm working, I mean, I used to never do that. I thought, well, that's cheating. You just have to start, you know? And I mean, I realized after a while, don't be an idiot. Everybody like scales it, so you don't have to reinvent it. You know, you find a composition, and then, but of course, when you take something that you've made that's small and you make it larger, it changes it. Yeah, so then usually what I do, I don't know if this is what you're asking, but usually I'll decide on the size based on the, you know, the drawing that I've made. And then I will either have a paper that size or cut a paper that size, and then just put a layer of paint on. And then I draw on top of that. I've discovered that that's much better than drawing and having like the form and the ground, and it's just to create a base. I draw on that and I adjust and adapt, and then I start working, kind of layering in paint. And then once the paint is on, I'm like, oh no, that's, you know, like what looked okay as a line suddenly doesn't look okay when the form is. Is this what you were asking?
Yes.
Or not? Okay.
I mean, you're designing even after you
Oh,
enlarge.
absolutely. It's not just a matter of, because you just don't know. And as I said, I may have an image of, you know, usually the form, I know it's going to be one of the dark forms. So that's, but whether it will be greener or bluer, or how it will relate to the ground, that I don't know. And that is just by doing. And I get to a point, and I rely a lot on Karen, I get to a point where I'm just like, okay, something's going on here, like how am I just not gonna mess it up? So I stop, you know, sometimes for a long time. And then I have to get like the courage to go back in and risk really messing it up. But, you know, I just continue. And there comes a point where it just feels that there's nothing more that I can really do, even though I feel sometimes I should be doing something more. And then Karen comes and says, no. It's really good. It's really helpful.
But I think what I was hearing Janet ask is, do you already know which are going to be like, or do you even consider them foreground and background, or negative and positive, or because you know sometimes they feel like they switch, you know?
Yes, some of the dark forms, the ones I'm working with now, not so much, but the dark forms when they were very circular or spherical, I mean, really, like, is it a solid? Is it a void? I mean, I was really playing with that. But I definitely know what the form is. And that goes to, again, maybe talking too much, but several years ago, I was in the project space with Fred Bentheim and Richard Barnett, and we realized that all three of us were painters who had also been sculptors. So we showed both, you know, two-dimensional work and sculpture. And someone asked us a question like, well, what comes first, you know? The ground or the form? And we all said, oh, the form, you know, which is such a sculptor's thing to say. You know, it's not like Jo-Ann's where she's put, no, I know what my form is. Now, what my form is going to do, I'm not sure of that initially, and then I have to adjust and adapt. You know, is it going to be very balanced? Is it going to be precarious? Is it going to feel ominous? Is it going to feel meditative? You know, what is it evoking? So does that
Yeah, it sounds like it's part of your process to tease that out along the way. Very
Yes.
different from Janet's process where
Well,
you really already know when you start what's gonna be negative and what's gonna be positive.
Yeah.
but the form is your
The form is the
guiding
form.
light.
The form is the form, yes, so, yeah, exactly. And that's why I realized, I work so intuitively, I just don't know until years later. It was one of my daughters who said, Mom, these paintings really look a lot like that sculpture you did 100 years ago. And I was like, you're right. And I hadn't picked up on it, but,
Or was it
No.
100 years ago?
It was 50 years ago. 50 years ago.
That's
1975.
That's literally
50
half
years
the
ago.
time.
Okay, but it's still a very long time ago. So,
I had another question, if I can ask another one, for Jo-Ann. So it was really interesting hearing about how you play with the grid and how it disappears and it comes back and break it and, and squishy, I love that. And then it occurred to me while you were talking, like, do you work with the grid at all, or do you play with a loosely woven grid, or is that not part of your work?
I don't work with a grid. I think if you do something long enough, and you have this conversation with your work, you kind of know where you're going until it tells you you're not going in that direction. But even like sitting here now, my studio is very small, so it's very hard to get away from the piece when you're working, and I'm working on a flat table most of the time, which is very different than working on an easel and being able to step back. So even now, there are nuances in the work that I'm not sure I saw until it was here in the space,
It does look different when you put it
Yeah,
on the wall, right?
it does, and things that I think are particular in one piece, I realize echo in other pieces. So it's not a grid, but I think when you get to be my age, and the cycle has gone around enough times, and the journey is, that is the journey, that I think that it becomes intuitive in a way. So
You definitely have some geometry, I think.
yeah, well, another one of my bad subjects, geometry and engineering. So also I think
Organic geometry.
oh yeah, that's a good thing. But I think also the thing that I was really good at the beginning in art school was design and composition. So I think that that's something that I really think about when I'm creating the piece, whether it happens at the very beginning or the middle or the end. I'm very conscious of building a composition that works. Sometimes I think, I would have been a good interior designer and maybe made some money or something. But so I think that it's about design and composition. And I think sometimes people do see things as a grid because I have all these shapes, these rectangles, but some of my older work, and there's lots of more organic shapes in those pieces too. So, interesting.
Any other thoughts, questions, John?
So following up, Jo-Ann, on what you're saying about these boxes. So I was in here yesterday looking with some visitors, and I told them a bit about you're from Central New York and you were really drawn to landscape, and we, kind of interpret this as maybe the sky without being too.
Yeah.
So then we got down here, and we were wondering if these might loosely, and if you don't want to give any clues here, that's okay. But this might be farmland, right? Like as you said, you're thinking an area of
I
your
grew up in cow country.
right. So when you mentioned looking down on the area, so could one interpret this as farmland or
Yes.
okay?
When I was growing up, I don't know, my sister always says, did we grow up in the same house? We're just a year apart. I have all these memories, but one of the things that I remember is that we didn't have a lot of money or anything. We had a roof over our head and good food and clothes, so we weren't needing anything else. But one of the things that we could do, that we could afford to do, is after dinner, both my parents worked, but we always had dinner together. And after dinner, we would get in the car, and my dad would take us for a ride. And right outside of Utica is farmland, and there's cows and corn, and just acres and acres of corn. So that was kind of our thing. So I think that's still there, farmland. But the other thing I think is flying over Ireland, seeing those, what do they call the sections? This is a little bit from them. Everybody's land is divided up with, stone walls.
Stone walls, right?
Yeah, but there is a word that, how much you own and everything. But so I think those two things are very, very much in my mind all the time. Or if you're anywhere in central New York, and you're looking at a hilltop, whether it's just right in your own city. I mean, Utica is really truly in the valley. I grew up at the ski slope a few blocks from where we lived, and you were really in the valley. But I think those images are always there. Like if you go 10 minutes north of Utica, and the Adirondack Mountains are there, and you see these patches of color, like here's the red maple trees, and here's the yellow, so there are patches of colors. So I don't know why, but that's always in my head, and then in my heart too.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, I want to mention that our next show at the gallery is titled The Moment Before You Run, a solo show by Juliet Martin. And that artist reception, mark your calendars, Saturday, April 26th from 4 to 6 p.m.
The rabbit secret will be resolved.
Why rabbits? We'll learn.
You'll learn.
I look forward to that.
Me too.
And Jo-Ann mentioned the solo show she's having this summer at Cousin Rose Gallery in Oak Bluffs. So stay tuned for more info about that. It's the last day for the Tower Show at Gowanus Wharf. If you, I don't know what time it is, but if you hop in a car and
4 to 6.
if you got till 6, you got 15 minutes. So many wonderful pieces there. And Ellen Chuse has her solo show, as she mentioned, True to Form, May 29th through June 29th, and her artist reception is Saturday, May 31st. And don't worry, it's not Memorial Day weekend. Any other things to mention?
I just would like to add one thing. First of all, I just think that I want to thank everybody who came today. We were so lucky it didn't rain. But also, I've been a member here, I think, for 9 years. I'm not sure, but anyway. But I just have to say, you never stop learning. So, even some of the artists that are members here, they sort of contribute to what I do because I learn from them. And we talk about, we have these meetings and stuff. So, just want to say thank you to the members that are even here today too.
Thank you, Jo-Ann, and thank you all for coming.
Yes.